Supereconomics Book 2, The How, Š-toireÉŠ Financial Engineering. Š-toire éŠ may just be the economic equivalent to Einstein's E equals mc squared. If you find this laughable or even arrogant, it's really not meant to be. It is forged from the $1,200 trillion valuation of the S-World global network between 2024 and 2080, and how most of this money is spent on recreating our planet in net zero and solving many other major problems, most of which are presented in the book 64 Reasons Why. Below we see the Š-toire éŠ calculator in year 1, 2024. But to be correct, Š-toire éŠ is S plus R times E times S, where S is for savings, R is for revenue, E is the percentage of savings and revenue spent on other companies in the same network, and the second S is how many times that money is spent each year. Note the accents are only there to make the letters stand out in a sentence. Supereconomics History 3, Malawi, 2024. Starting in red with 6.3 billion in savings and revenue, we multiply this cash by the E of 90%, so 90% of all spending is directed to other companies and or personnel in the same network, leaving 5.6 billion in cash flow in the network, which converts to savings and stays in the network until the next year when it converts back into cash flow. A critical part of this process is that the money exchanged is in US dollars, not local currency. This solves many economic arguments, including the strength or weakness of local currency, making no difference to the grand split network, and inflation can be pegged at the inflation of the dollar globally. Other information shown is that 2,048 companies are trading from this city/suburb, each of which is its own monopoly. We further see that each of the 2,048 monopoly companies has a cash flow of 2.7 million that each will spend in 2024. Revenue and savings 2024. It's important to note in the long term, by the year 2080, that 92% of all revenue is created by the suburb sale, a sale that should have been negotiated long before 2024. With the suburb sale in place, we can safely remove all other income if we deduct 8% from our final forecast, which is well within the margin of error. This justifies all capital inflows and begins the Š-toire éŠ Malawi journey from 0 to 1% of GDP by 2080. In the table below, we see at the top Malawi's percent of global GDP in 2024 is very low, 0.003% of the world's GDP. We see investments 4 billion, we see savings 0, we see the suburb sale just over $1 billion, we see aid and foundations at 1 billion, real estate sold 262 million, and a token exports figure of 5 million, creating 6.3 billion dollars. 2024 is the only investment round. However, city startup costs are a factor at between 10 and 20 billion. For this reason, in place of what we are looking at now, in place of one, we're looking at 4 or maybe 8 suburbs sold in the network city, each of which would contribute to the initial startup costs and their portion of the cash flow for their 2,048 businesses, and each year thereafter pay 1 billion for 10 years or more to be spent improving the infrastructure of the suburb, reforestation of the surrounds, building municipal buildings, commercial, industrial, residential, real estate, malls, marinas, a few golf courses, schools, universities, stadiums, wonders, private islands, and grand offices for the many new businesses that do require an office. All rendered in a beautiful 3D by Technology 5 S-World VSN, Virtual Social Network, then gamified and simulated by Technology 6 S-World UCS, and advertised and distributed by Technology 4 S-World Film. adding other grand spin networks across the globe. Because we are close to 0% of cash flow, because exports are close to 0% of cash flow, we avoid arguments about trade. So long as we can sell the suburbs, this is a non-zero sum game. Adding grand spin networks in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, Zambia, Kenya, the Seychelles and Mauritius does not detract from the success of the Malawi network, because 99% of all the GDP is created and consumed within the parent country, with minimal effect on other countries except for additional goods and services made above the tender sold to international markets, if such trade was allowed. The addition of another country to the network would only increase Malawi's riches per classical and dynamic comparative advantage. At the end of this chapter, from tender sales alone, not including trade, we add 24 trillion in cash flow in Malawi, which roughly generates 12 trillion in GDP. To calculate global growth, multiply by the 12 trillion as many times as many countries or states who might participate. If that figure is 100, then we're adding 1,200 trillion in new GDP, done in a way that future-proofs future Earth in 2032, then 2048 and 2080 and beyond, creating a more ecological and socially balanced world. We appreciate this is an absolutely absurd figure, however, it is mathematically justified in this document, so please read on. Malawi 2025, Supereconomics History Free. E is at 92%, spin is at 2%. The following year, in 2025, there is no investment. In the table below, beneath the zero investment row, is the savings of 5.6 billion, the cash flow left in the bank at the end of 2024, available to use again in 2025. There is more cash flow created by savings than all other income streams combined. After savings is the income stream for the suburb sale, which accounts for 92% of all revenue by 2080, followed by 1.5 billion in aid or revenue from foundations, then the real estate sales from Angel City 1 and the token export figures of 5 million. This adds up to 8.5 billion, and the figure is placed at the beginning of the Š-ส็ÉŠ calculator for 2025. Next, we start to see the mathematics of supereconomics, the monopoly economics created from the Š-ส็ÉŠ equation. Very lightly at first as we increase spin from 1 to 2 and nudge E from 90% to 91%. Malawi 2025, Supereconomics History Free. E equals 92%, spin equals 2. As before, we add revenue and savings, this time making 8.5 billion. Then we increase E so that 91% of this figure is spent with other companies or personnel in the same network. This requires Technology 2, the TBS, Total Business Systems, and Technology 8, DCA, Dynamic Comparative Advantage Software, to apply. Once applied, 8.5 billion times 91% equals 7.8 billion remaining in the bank. But this time we spin, as we make whatever needs to be made and spend whatever needs to be spent within 191 days, before the 10th of July 2025. And then on the 11th of July 2025, we are ready to do much the same again, because the spun cash flow creates 7.8 billion, which slips into spin 2 row, where it is spent again. Again, with 91% of all sales to other companies and personnel in the same network. We call this a spin, and when added to the initial revenue and savings, it more than doubles the cash flow from 5.6 billion in 2024 to 14.8 billion in 2025. Don't worry if you don't get it yet. We've got a few more of these to look at, and by the time we get there, it should all be clear. And this is the trick right here, the ability to increase the cash flow by increasing the pace of production due to spin, and then retaining most of that spending in the network by increasing E, recycle efficiency. Then further increasing cash flow by increasing spin and efficiency all the way to spin 32 and an E of 99.5 in 2080. Malawi, 2025 to 2032. From 2025 to 2031, we see spin increase by 1 each year up to spin 9 in 2032. Savings steadily increase to 8.9 billion and E increases to 99. The suburb sale, Angel City 1, real estate sold and trade figures increase by 5% each year. Aid increases to a height of 2.5 billion in 2027 and reduces to nothing in 2032. Now let us look at the cash flow steadily increasing each year from 14.9 billion in 2025 to 106 billion in 2032. This exponential growth is caused by spin and averages at 50% a year. We see this in the right hand column. Malawi, 2032, Supereconomics History 3, E 99%, spin 9. And here we can clearly see each row as a separate spin. Above, we now see the 2032 cash flow at 106 billion, up from 66.3 billion in 2024. To facilitate this, we have increased spin to 9 spins with an E of 99%, and the time the initial spending period has shrunk from 1 year in 2024 to just 42 days in 2032. Because E is near a perfect monopoly at 99%, most of the savings and revenue are conserved within the network. We also see that there are now 24,576 companies that receive 4.3 million a year in tender cash flow. This cash flow is a little bit low, but can be increased simply by making fewer companies. Below, we see the revenue plus savings for Malawi 2032. Investment, 0. Savings, 8.9 billion. Suburb sale, 2 suburbs now, 3 billion, 3.1 billion. Aid and foundations, 0. Real estate sold, 387 million. Exports, that token, 7 million. Malawi, 2032 to 2048. In the spreadsheet below, we see the years 2032 to 2048 in 4-year intervals. And we see the same pattern we saw between 2024 and 2032, but this time leading to macroeconomic numbers. In general, I have created and applied a law that tells us how much GDP we expect to make from the cash flow spent. I added this law after reading A Concise Guide to Macroeconomics by Harvard professor David A. Moss, who informs us that in GDP accounting, the classic mistake is to count the items that made the product in a house, the bricks, the mortar, tiles, other, and to also count the price that the house sold for. That's the double counting problem. Luckily, we found out about this rule early, and we will see on the general spreadsheet two tabs called the Siena equilibrium. To cut a long story short, we believe if we multiply cash flow by about 55%, ranging significantly for different specialities, then we come to about the right value for GDP, output created. For safety and simplicity, we use 50% and call this effect the CFV, the cash flow variable. We can see it below. Note on the above, we still need to work out the formula for precise discounting, but the amounts above are a good indicator. Working from the starting point that in 2080, discounting the cash flow by 0.25% leads to the correct figure. For the variables entered, noting that in this simulation, global growth is set at 2.5% and Malawi growth is set at 5%. These figures are consistent with most economic professionals' estimates. So to work out GDP in 2048, we take the cash flow, 867 billion, and multiply it by the CFV of 50%, which gives us 433 billion, and then multiply by 56%, discounting to the equivalent of 242 billion in today's money. Malawi, 2048. Supereconomics History 3. Š-toireÉŠ in the Malawi Grand Spin Network 2048, E equals 99.5, spin equals 25. In the now familiar Š-toire calculator for 2048, we see each spin, each complete spend of all the cash flow roughly 2 weeks apart, facilitated by a very high E of 99.5% and 25 spins, which ratchets up $867 billion of cash flow, about $433 billion in GDP. There are now 131,072 companies, each spending 6.6 million in cash flow each year. And Malawi owns 0.25% of global GDP. And we can see here quite clearly, each couple of weeks, we do a new spin. There's the cash flow, etc. Such a high E. Is such a high E achievable? Maybe not. I would prefer not to go higher than 97.5 and balance by more suburb sales, 8 in place of 1, and in place of lots of trade in place of very little trade, as we see here. Plus throw in some recessions. History 2 had 15 years of recessions and increased cash flow each year, going from 0 to 1% of GDP by 2051. And we can see that on video, www.supereconomics.ai/video/25. Okay, revenue and savings. Malawi, 2048. Investment, 0. Savings, 25.9 billion. Suburb sale, 3 of them now, 10.1 billion. Aid and foundations, nothing. Real estate sold, 846 million. Exports, trade, 16 million. Remember, that's the token figure. Malawi, 2048 to 2080. Below, we see the key statistics between 2048 and 2080 in jumps of 4 years. Now we are firmly in the land of macroeconomics, as the 2080 Malawi has arrived from 0 to 1% of GDP, with $8.2 trillion made this year, which, when we add the CFV and discount at 0.25 to make today's value of just over 1 trillion. Malawi, 2080, Supereconomics History 3, E 99.5 and spin equals 32. In Malawi, 2080, we now have 327,680 companies spending on average 25 million a year in cash flow, for a total of 8.2 trillion in cash flow, equal to about 1 trillion in discounted GDP, taking Malawi from 0 to 1% of global GDP, a 29x increase to the money supply. And we can see it below, quite a thing. Okay, we are now at the next section, which is to look at some other videos, but this will be presented separately. We just have a quick peek. There they are. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you listening. Thanks.